Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Dennis Entholson, Chief Learning Officer for the National Art Education Association. Tonight, we're using Zoom for webinars. Please feel free to use the chat for questions, comments, or observations. We are using closed captioning. You just simply have to go to transcript along the bottom, live transcript. And I'm pleased to introduce our lead panelists for this evening. Dr. Ami Kantawala is an adjunct associate professor in art and art education at Teachers College, Columbia University in New York. She also teaches in Boston University's online Masters of Art Education program. Her research intersects historical methods, cultural studies, post-colonial theory, higher education leadership, qualitative research, and mentoring. She has published articles in research journals such as the Visual Arts Research, Studies in Art Education, and the International Journal of Art and Design Education. Dr. Kantawala served on the editorial boards for the Journal of Visual Inquiry, Learning and Teaching Art, Studies in Art Education, published by NAEA, the Journal of Social Theory in Art Education, also published by NAEA, and the Journal for Cultural Research in Art Education. Dr. Kantawala is the editor of the Journal for Art Education with NAEA. In short, Dr. Kantawala and her panelists can guide you through the writing process for art education. With that, thank you, Ami, and let's get started.
Thank you, Dennis, and welcome everybody. Thank you for spending your summer evening with us. And we are very delighted to have such a wonderful turnout. And we hope that after hearing us this evening, you will consider joining NAEA if you're not a member, and consider contributing to your journal, which is really a journal for art teachers who are practitioners. So I will start our evening now and introduce my colleagues. All right, so the session is I just want to give a quick overview of how we are going to run this session. I'm going to introduce the journal, the scope of the journal, what kind of work we publish. We also want to talk about practice of writing and offer you some writing advice. We'll discuss some special issues that we have published and we will be publishing. We'll touch briefly upon writing from an anti-racist perspective. Then I'll hand it over to my colleagues, Dr. Asavri Tate and Dr. Ashley Mask, to talk about instructional resources. And then Kendall Crabb, our assistant editor, will give you a run through of how to submit manuscripts and the review process. And we'll close with question and answers. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Asavri and Ashley. Would you like to say a quick hello and say who you are and where you are?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Asavri Tate. I graduated with my PhD in art education from Penn State in 2017. Since then, I have been working as an adjunct instructor, as and when things come along. And Ami has been extremely kind. She offered me this opportunity to be a co-editor with Ashley for the instructional resources for the journal. And it has been a wonderful journey. It's been amazing to learn so many new things and work with so many different talented authors. And I'm very excited to be doing this right now and for the next year or so. Thank you, Ami. Over to you, Ashley.
Hey, everyone. It's great to be with you all this evening. My name is Ashley Mask. I completed the doctoral program at Teachers College at Columbia University in New York City last year. What is pandemic time? It was right at the beginning of the pandemic. So finished the art education doctoral program then, and I'm doing my own writing, working with Asavri on the instructional resources for the art education journal, and also doing adjunct teaching. My background is actually in art museum education, so I also do freelance education work at several museums in New York City. Right now I'm in Alabama visiting my family, driving back to New York City tomorrow. So please send your your good travel wishes my way. And it's great to be with you all this evening.
Kendall.
Hi, I'm Kendall Crabb. I'm the assistant editor of Art Education, and I've been doing this just for about 2 years now. And I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Arizona, and I'm also teaching pre-service art educators at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. So I'm based in Chicago right now. I'm really excited to talk to you all about the journal. Thanks.
Thank you, ladies, and thank you, Dennis. So one of the things that is unique about Art Education Journal is that it really focuses on the art teacher and the practices and the ideas that you deal with your day-to-day classroom issues. And that could range from anything related to how you teach, student behavior, any contemporary issues, any ongoing issues like race, social justice, international histories, Asian American art, student conversation, you name it, and we can publish it. So there are many different ways we look at our classroom, and that's the space where things happen. And how you kind of relate to the things that happen in your classroom and how you make that into an inquiry that allows you to then reflect on your own practice and then write about it. And that's our hope, that this journal will inspire you to really look at your classroom in a different context and really think about your role as an inquirer who can then tell the story of your classroom to the readership, which is national and international. And we're really focused on K through 12 for this particular journal, but that doesn't mean that higher ed is not welcome, but we really want to encourage our teachers to write and really push them to think about their classroom as a space where they can make things, they can see things, and they can tell their stories. So I just quickly want to kind of share that the manuscripts that you can submit for the journal are focused on that deal with professional interest and contemporary issues. We are really encouraging and looking to diversify the kind of manuscripts that we get. Diverse authors, newer authors, international perspectives, examples of your experiences and practices, and anything that is directly applicable to our leadership. What we don't want folks to submit are dissertations, research reports, and scholarly papers. This is not a forum for that. Yes, we're looking at scholarship in this journal, but we're not looking at full-length research projects and dissertations. For that, you look at studies or you look at other journals. How-to ideas. We're not a journal that publishes lesson plans. Those should be submitted to arts and activities or school arts. And anything that you select to submit should not be published or sent anywhere else. You need to make sure that before you submit it, that you've crossed all your I's and T's before it gets to us. What we really want to talk about today is the process of writing. And often a lot of us turn away with the idea of writing, and writing is hard. I will quote Margaret Atwood, one of my favorite fiction authors, who says that you become a better writer by writing. You become a writer by writing, and waste paper basket is your best friend. So often as teachers, we turn away from writing, or we are afraid that, oh, I cannot publish. How can I ever get there? But yes, you can get there. This is the space for that. And this is a mentoring journal rather than a journal that'll kind of not accept something that is published, like submitted the first time. We allow 2 revisions, which is really not the case with most other academic journals. They stop at 1. We work with you very closely. There is a very strong review board who is very well versed in a variety of topics that the journal publishes. And each manuscript has 2 to 3 blind reviewers who are assigned. And they give you a lot of feedback to basically strengthen the work that you do. So don't be uncomfortable to submit, because it's really the job of the reviewer is to help you clarify your ideas and thinking so that you can get get it to a level that it can be published. And essentially, effective writing is rewriting. All of us on this panel go through several drafts of our own writing as well. There's some basic secrets, and I'm going to share my favorite author, Helen Sword, who really talks about stylish academic writing. And she pushes teachers, for all of us who are in the classroom, to really think about telling a story of what happens in our classroom. So she encourages us to start with an opening hook. Tell a story. Remind yourself of an incident that triggered that moment to really dig deep into that inquiry. And be human and be concrete. Like, it's your narrative. How is the reader going to get drawn into your story when they look at the manuscript, when they look at a published piece of writing? Often we'll have folks telling a personal story about their travel or something that they were moved by, a classroom incident, that something that a child may have said. So anything that draws the reader in, and that's when the opening statement becomes really, really powerful. And of course, as you tell your story, you weave in the literature and you weave in what goes on in the field and so on and so forth. But we're really pushing for you to develop that writer's voice, your voice that we want to hear as a teacher. Sweat the details, show, don't tell. No, we hear elementary school, I mean, I say this to my children who are 15 and 11 all the time, that show, don't tell. Tell me the details, tell me how the story happened. And it's same with academic writing. We don't want it to be dry. We want your writing to come through. We want it to come alive for who reads it. And this is always a good mantra to remember. Write without fear, edit without mercy. And taking that editorial pencil and just editing mercilessly and revising will really make it a powerful piece of writing. And another thing that is always helpful before you submit to the journal is to look at the kind of articles the journal publishes and the special issues that we do and the kind of writing that the journal does, that the author submit. Look at the editorials written by myself, by my past editors, Amy and James. You'll get a sense of what we are looking for and the kind of manuscripts that are coming in. And it'll give you a solid sense of how people write. And you'll see that all 6 or 7 articles and instructional resources published in each issue are very different, and they cover a diverse range of topics. So something might even inspire you from that point. The first webinar that we had done last year, there was a conversation about writing groups. And yes, we don't have a formal writing group for the journal, but this is something that you can form with your colleagues across the globe. And with Zoom now, that has become something that is very accessible, very easy. You can meet together as a group, you can collaborate and write a piece together. So there are many different ways to approach the writing that will make it accessible and enjoyable for you, because it's really less about submitting to just simply getting published, but there's a joy to see your work in print and really making that, having that passion about what you want to write. And that passion comes through with what you will submit. So here are some special issues that we have done so far, and we will be doing additional issues in the coming years. So this is just hot off the press. It's not in press yet, but this was the cover that we just finalized for the September issue that has been co-edited by Kendall, Asavri, Ashley, Dipti Desai, Amy Cray, and Steve Carpenter. And the call was titled Color of Change, and the issue is titled The Denial of Racism, A Call to Action. So that is our very first special issue of 2021. We have done a series of COVID section commentaries that ran through the entire year, which we will stop, I think, by early next year, because we received an overwhelming number of section entries, and we've published 3 in every issue. These were experiences in distance and isolation, and We wanted people to share their experiences of working and making art in isolation or teaching in isolation. The November special issue is going to be on history in the making and reflections during isolation about teaching and your experiences. The January issue is dedicated to teacher education and it's titled Brave Spaces. Next year, we are doing a special issue on intersectionality, which will be Color of Change 2, and 2023 we'll do Color of Change 3 with Latinx. We've introduced a new column this year, 2021, which if you're a member and if you subscribe to the journal, you'll receive 6 sections on writing with tips from past editors, editorial board members, other scholars in the field, to really give you that opportunity to think about writing and think about writing up the work that you do and being a reflexive practitioner. Next year, we're going to run a column on teaching from an anti-racist perspective, and it will be done by 6 guest speakers. The inaugural one is going to be done by James Rowling, who's currently the president of NAEA. So check these issues out. There are some wonderful instructional resources. There are a lot of fascinating commentaries and material that you can use. I meant to mention that this particular issue of September is entirely focused on instructional resources related to race. And they're not really lesson plans, but that's a springboard for you to think about teaching in a different way and where you can take your teaching by being more current and really thinking about these issues that are often not discussed openly. There are 2 highly recommended texts that I strongly encourage for anybody interested in submitting or developing their writing practice as a teacher. Writing Your Journal Article in 12 Weeks by Wendy Belcher. She also has a website. And Stylish Academic Writing, Helen Sword, who also has a website. And Helen runs like writing clinics where you can work with other authors. There's no charge to those free clinics. There's a lot of resources on her website. There is a 30-day writing challenge, which I had done myself with a couple of my colleagues. And the commitment was to write every day for 25 minutes. So really, writing is about developing a practice, just like you're teaching and art making, that you develop the practice of writing. And once you develop the practice of writing, it becomes second nature. And writing about what happens in the classroom and documenting that story is one of the most powerful ways to really reflect on your work and do what you're doing and how you can do it differently. And it becomes a conversation with so many others in the field. And you never know where you might end up. If you are a faculty member attending this webinar on writing, we encourage that you consider having your students submit an assignment as any part of your course and really encourage them to submit it. Like I often have my students write and submit and have them go through a review process with any journal of their choice. And it's an immense joy to see how that work develops from start to finish. And for me as editor and for my editorial team and my review board, it's really a pleasure to see a manuscript from when it first comes to us and to see it through publication. So these are some examples of the Writer's Corner, and there are a total 6 of them. So far we have 4 published. The 5th one should be out soon, and the 6th one will be out in November. So you will have access to all of these. And they're really wonderful little nuggets, which are so useful for anybody picking up writing. One of the things that we are really encouraging all our authors, whether they are writing instructional resources or whether they are writing manuscripts, to dig deep into inclusive and anti-racist writing. We will be posting a more substantial guideline on our website. So what I'm sharing here is not necessarily exclusive or inclusive. There is a lot more work to be done, but we really want to encourage all our authors and teachers to pay attention to these details, which have become, it's essential that we are fully aware of that as educators. So one of the things that we ask you to think about is that paying attention to ways language can be and has been used to exclude people or groups of people. It's unintentional, but being aware is helpful so that we can get out of that habit. We have to intentionally think about the perspectives, peoples, and groups that might be excluded and even harmed through careless word choices. So something that we want to be really hyper aware about. There's some basic principles of inclusive and anti-racist writing: questioning our assumptions, choosing our words carefully and thoughtfully, recognizing diversity, avoid sweeping generalizations, and making sure that you're not using any adjectives to refer to people or a group of people. Being aware of sexual orientations and gender identity, and understanding ableism, disability, mental health, and neurodiversity. In the essence of time, I simply cannot go through each of these categories in depth, but as I said, in the next couple of months, we will make sure that there is enough resources on our how to write for the journal, so folks really get an opportunity to think about all of these aspects when they're writing. Asavri and Ashley are going to talk about author positionality, so I'm not going to repeat that here. The bit about understanding gender identities and sexual orientations are normal, and none are more or less noteworthy, and having that understanding will help your writing. We don't dismiss these identities as preferences, and often we want to make sure that we write them correctly as sexual preferences, preferred pronouns, personal pronouns. As you might see, a lot of folks write their pronoun in their email signatures now, or in presentations and so on and so forth. And the goal of inclusive writing is to also make sure that we avoid gender bias and gender language, unless gender is a specific area of discussion, and recognizing trans and non-binary gender identities and expressions through your writing, if that's what your writing is about. The term BIPOC is becoming increasingly popular in activist and academic writing. It also has been questioned by many. So again, there is no one, so I'm not challenging that here. I'm simply putting this out there for us to consider this, because these terms really allow for collective activism and recognition that while differences may exist, living in a culture of white supremacy impacts all folks of color. They're also a useful way of focusing on being a person of color rather than being defined as non-white, because if you don't see color, you don't see me. And I can say that as a woman of color myself, that I am of Indian origin, and I was born and raised in India, and I have been living here 20 years, but often people still ask, oh, all Indians eat curry. No, all Indians don't eat curry. And being careful of how cultures are understood and identities are understood. And it's essential that to avoid those generalizations, and specificity is a core principle of inclusive writing. And it is better to write specifically and directly about the experiences of particular people or groups of people, rather than trying to generalize across a wide swath of experience, as I just explained with the non-education related example that all Indians eat curry or all Indians speak one language, and just same principle. When you do need to generalize, it is better to use the term racialized people rather than using the acronym BIPOC. And the benefits of doing that is that the term racialized recognizes that race is not an inherent quality of an individual, but rather a complex sociocultural process. So we are encouraging all these conversations. We want to do a lot of diversity work related to the journal. We really want to encourage and expand our breadth and depth in the kind of conversations we have, and really making and encouraging you to think of conversations that you normally wouldn't have and consider writing for the journal, making that uncomfortable conversation comfortable, really picking out the nuances in your classroom that you often don't think about, tell us your story, because we are hungry for that. The board is hungry for that. The field is hungry for that. And here are some other examples about inclusive writing, that, you know, how you understand language use, writing, and all forms of communicating. These are constantly changing. 15 years ago, one would have never thought of these aspects in our writing, but now we're becoming more and more aware, particularly after George Floyd. The nation has really consciously making the effort to really make sure that we are not traveling back in time. And it's really not about memorizing a list of perceived or best terms, but rather really making yourself aware, learning about what is the best way to include and develop this kind of writing and research and work and teaching. So as I said, I will share these and you'll have access to a lot more information about this, but this is just to give you an overview as you think about ideas. I want to point out to the two letters that our current NAEA president, James Rowling, and who is my colleague and a dear friend, had written last year when Amy was editor, Making Black Lives Matter Towards an Anti-Racist Art Making and Teaching Agenda, Part 1 and 2. If you have not read it, I highly recommend that you read it, print it, post it in your classroom, and implement everything that James writes in here, because it is really going to be something that will help us shift the way we think about our teaching and learning. So I'm going to stop here because I want to hand over to Asavri and Ashley so they can guide you through the instructional resources. Then Kendall can talk about the submission process and anything else that is related. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. Hello again. And thank you, Ami, for all of the wonderful work you're doing. And I also want to thank all of the attendees for the great questions that you're posing in the chat. We're doing our best to keep track of them. Kendall, thank you for all of your responses there too. I'm just going to speak for a few moments about instructional resources. I, along with Asavri, get to co-edit the instructional resources. And for those of you who regularly read the journal, you may know this, but there is a distinction between the regular articles for the journal and what we call instructional resources. So this is a regular feature. It's included in each issue of Art Education. It takes a slightly different form than the other articles that you typically find in the journal. Asavri, will you go forward? So what is an instructional resource, or as an IR, as we often refer to it? So this is an article that describes the processes or experiences associated with exploring particular artworks, artists, or topic areas that are anchored in works of art. They're not how-tos, they're not lesson plans, but rather they can be thought of as a story about the intersection between an artwork or an artist, or as I say, a topic area related to an artwork or an artist, and art teachers, educators, and students. So what we want is for IRs to be inspirational, practical, and broad in their application, meaning that the ideas that you might share through an instructional resource could work well for a variety of grade levels or diverse learning environments. So to echo some of what's already been said about who writes these articles for the Art Education Journal, certainly we love hearing from classroom art teachers. We also really love hearing from art museum educators, teaching artists, and community art educators. These all make ideal authors for an instructional resource because you are all working with artists and specific artworks, and you're often anchoring your teaching not only in art making, but in art looking. So perhaps the best way to understand what makes an IR is to see one, and Asavri is going to take us through one to give you a sense of the component parts of an IR.
All right. Thanks, Ashley. So now that we know what an IR is, I'd love to walk you through one of the IRs that was published in our very recent issue. And I'd like to talk about the different aspects or the components of an IR. And as I'm talking about these components, I will also like to talk about some guidelines, something for prospective IR writers to think about as they're writing their IR. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this for this particular webinar is that we believe we might save a lot of time, the author's time and the reviewer's time in the long run, if authors really attend to these aspects while they're writing and think about these aspects and bring it into their writing. So the first thing I'd like to talk about, well, I'm not able to move to the next slide. Can I quickly stop sharing there? Sorry about that. All right, there we go. Okay, so the introduction, and Ami talked so eloquently
Sabri,
right now about,
we aren't seeing your screen yet.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. Oh, that's because I didn't share my screen. I apologize. Can you now? All right, and let me see if I'm able to move the slides. Yep, all right, so we're back. Ami so eloquently talked about introduction and how you need a hook to pull the reader into your story. And I thought it'd be great to kind of give you an example of what that looks like. So in this IR on artist Vanessa German, the author Sue Ulick starts the IR with saying, when I first encountered the artwork of Vanessa German in 2014, the bold colors of the Black Madonna paintings and mixed media works immediately captured my attention, and a handwritten wall narrative declaring, I believe in the power of art, deeply resonated with me. And that is so striking. It's so, it makes Sue Ulick, the author, seem so humane, and you kind of relate to her as you kind of put yourself in her shoes, that you're in an art museum and you see somebody's work that has such an impact on you. So this is a great way to start an IR, and we strongly encourage authors to, as Ami said, check out Helen Ford's work, find ways to make your introductions really engaging, really strong, really inviting. And that again, we work with authors very deeply. We spend a lot of time on every instructional resource, Ashley and I, and we try to bring this into the work before it's finished. But this is something for authors to think about when they're writing on their own as well. The main idea, this really speaks to clear thinking reflects clear writing. A lot of times we've noticed that our feedback is really focused on helping authors hone their main idea. The IR is sometimes there is an idea guiding the IR, but it often feels like it needs to be simplified. What is the essence? We keep asking the authors who need some help with this. What's the essence of what you're trying to say? And so that's the main purpose. We love seeing IRs where the idea is clear and there's a clarity of purpose. And one exercise that we strongly recommend that you do is see if you can really boil down the essence of your IR to 2 sentences. And this is what we call elevator speech. So if you're working on your dissertation, and imagine that you're in an elevator and someone asks you, oh, what's your research about? What's your dissertation about? Can you boil it down to 2 sentences? And if we're able to really simplify that, it seems simple, right? That you should be able to tell people what the work is about in 2 sentences, but it's harder than you think. But once you have those 2 sentences, that's the real strong foundational stone on which everything else is built. So we strongly encourage that you have a very clear idea of what your instructional resource is about, and then build on top of that. Again, I'd like to go back here just to give you a sense of how clear an author can write. So Ulick says, in this resource featuring the art of Vanessa German, I heed the call to implement an anti-racist curriculum by amplifying Black visual culture, Grant 2020, and lifting Black voices, Gray and Herman 2020, centering an African aesthetic of craft media and non-traditional materials, ACUP 2020, and to actively disrupt racism through an anti-racist approach, Rolling 2020. So in this one sentence, she tells you what she wants to do, and why. So the why question is the relevance. And my advisor at Penn State, Dr. Steve Carpenter, he would always pose the so what question to me. So if you ever told him that this is an idea you want to explore, or this is a research topic you want to explore, he'd say, why? So what? Do you have an answer to the so what question? Why is this important? And we really encourage authors to look to literature, to the current contemporary art education scholarship, to really lay the foundation work for the relevance part. And in this particular instructional resource, if you go back, while I was reading this quote, I said Grant 2020, Cray and Ehrman 2020. So these are all the authors, scholarly authors that the instructional resource author was looking to find relevance, why this work is important, why it's important to center African aesthetic of crafts and media. So that's the relevance piece, and we strongly encourage authors for instructional resources to have a strong relevance section, because this is not a lesson plan. So that's the explanation for why you would need to have scholarly pieces, because this is more than a lesson plan. You could think of it as an inspiration or a resource or a tool. That's what an instructional resource is meant to do, but not as a clear-cut piece of paper that tells you this is how you implement your lesson in a classroom. We want readers to have a more solid understanding of what's the scholarship that's guiding the instructional resource. So here's the author positionality piece that Ami talked about. And Ashley is going to talk in much greater detail about author positionality, but I also want to point to how this author has particularly made use of, or how she has been explicit about making clear her own positionality. So one of the simplest ways to think about author positionality is making explicit for your reader what your worldview is and how it's informed by your gender, by your race, by any other position that you are a part of, and that affects your experiences and your worldview. So Suyulik writes that as I write this instructional resource, I'm keenly aware that my perception of Black artists' work will always be viewed through my lens of whiteness. So here she's made explicit that she's a white art educator, and that there are certain limitations when she is working with a Black artist's work. So that is how we encourage authors to really be explicit about where you're coming from, what informs your worldview. Structure and organization. One of the things that we really like to see in instructional resources is sort of laying the blueprint out for the readers, telling them what it is that how are you planning the instructional resource to unfold for the reader. And I've learned this from my husband, who gives a lot of presentations. And he said, when you're presenting something in a formal space, you should have one slide that tells the audience what it is that you're going to present. Then you present what you're going to present, and then you say, I just presented so-and-so. So you're then giving a summary. And one of the benefits of doing that is that your piece of writing is not a maze anymore, where you're reading, the readers are reading, and they're like, wait, what am I reading now? If you've laid down the sort of the blueprint for the reader knows exactly what it is that they're reading. So for instance, I love using this instructional resource as an example, and I hope it's helpful to you, all of you who are listening. So this is how Yulik lays out the plan. She says, I will accomplish whatever she said she's going to accomplish by focusing on 3 goals. First, I will introduce art educators to the art of contemporary Black artist Vanessa German, highlighting her role as citizen artist. Second, I will focus on German's artistic practices using non-traditional media to create power figures. Third, I provide anti-racist curriculum connections geared towards 8th grade and above. So she's very clear in how she's going to accomplish what she's going to accomplish. We really encourage that kind of clarity in writing and structuring. Engaging images. So this is the fun part. We strongly encourage our authors to really look for lots of lovely, beautiful, engaging images. And they're really, can you imagine if this is one of the images that is in Sue Ulick's instructional resource, and that is also the cover of the journal. So to have your article's image be on the cover page, I think that's, I'm sure she must have felt great about that. So please consider using really engaging images. And if you have any questions about image submissions, Kendall, sorry, I'm please contact Kendall or one of us. But Kendall has the answers to almost everything. So connections to practice. So again, this is not a lesson plan, but it's certainly geared towards teachers in pedagogical spaces. So we encourage authors to make really strong connections to practice. And for example, if you remember what I just read from this IR, Sue made the connection to practice by saying that this instructional resource is geared for teachers working with students in the 8th grade and above. So be very explicit with who it's intended for. That's always great, although we don't, it's not prescriptive that, that's how it has to be used, but you're just giving ideas to educators. And if you go to the website, if you go to the Taylor and Francis website, and if you go through what's written as guidelines for instructional resources, you will find that some ways to make connections is by following the National Core Arts Standards. And what this author did was made connections to creating, presenting, responding, and connecting. So that's just one way. You can make connections to practice in many other ways. So we're very open, and we encourage authors to be open to new ideas. You would imagine that it's unnecessary to say that make sure there's a conclusion, but we'd like to say, please make sure if we're submitting that there's a conclusion to your instructional resource. We encourage conclusions to be such that you're joining the dots. As I said, when I was talking about giving a formal presentation, you just tell your readers what they just read and kind of, again, tie any loose ends and join the dots. So this is some of the logistical stuff about writing instructional resources. Word count, we really, really, really are very strict. I hate to say very strict, but we really request that you honor the word limit, which is 2,500 words, because we cannot publish IRs longer than that. So the word limit would be 2,000 to 2,500 words. The instructional resource needs to be formatted according to APA 7th edition. Please refer to the APA 7th edition manual to understand the details of APA. References have to be also formatted according to APA. There is no set number on how many references you absolutely need, but we encourage you to, as this goes back to the relevance piece, where we want authors to make that connection to contemporary scholarship. And so that's where you would have references that connect to the scholarship, and at least 5 and definitely more. That's how much we encourage. And so here's where I would like to recap what I just said. A few pointers, guidelines, helpful tips, call it what you'd like. So here are the guidelines for writing instructional resources. Make sure the introduction is engaging. The main idea and clarity of purpose are well articulated. There's strong relevance supported by scholarly literature. There's a clear structure and organization to your instructional resource. Make your author positionality explicit. Make sure the conclusion is clear and there is a strong connection to practice. Please use APA 7th edition and please honor the word count. And okay, before I let Ashley take over, I just have a couple things to say that I don't have a slide for. We strongly encourage you to read other instructional resources before you write and submit your instructional resource. And the whole point with showing you an example of an instructional resource was not to give you sort of a prescriptive sample. That was not the point. This was just to give you ideas for what you need to think about when you're writing an instructional resource. But the structure of your instructional resource, if you want to write one, can be very different. So for this particular instructional resource, the author interviewed the artist. And so you will also see the artist's voice appear throughout the IR, and that makes for very engaging reading too. And that's similar to another instructional resource that was written by Sarah Ackerman on artist Shama Golden. But there are other instructional resources that don't have this format. Another instructional resource I recommend you look out for is the one that will be coming out soon. It's by author Joy Bertling. And Bertling focuses on the topic of mortality, decadence, and death, and then uses different artists to work with these themes. So multiple artists, single theme. That's the way that instructional resource is structured. Whereas this instructional resource is one artist and then kind of taking off from there. So there's no set rule. Let your idea take shape, let the structure emerge. But this is just to walk you through what a good IR looks like. And over to you, Ashley.
Thanks, Asavri. And just to reiterate what Asavri is sharing, definitely taking a look at IRs that have already been published. If you don't have your physical copies of the Art Education Journal handy, there are sample IRs that are available on the website to NAEA members, so you can always look for them there. I also just wanted to underline and underscore what Asavri suggested here, which is you may not have heard of some of these artists. We love seeing instructional resources that, that showcase artists that haven't been used a lot in classrooms, or maybe it's an artist you know personally. So this doesn't have to be a well-known artist, somebody that's exhibiting all over the world. This could be an artist that you know in your community. And as Asavri said, you might interview that artist and talk with them about their work. So that's just one way, as she said, to approach an instructional resource. So really quickly, we're just going to try to dive a little bit deeper into author positionality. What do we mean by this? And there's some comments and questions coming up in the chat, so feel free to look at that as well. But I'll try to add a little bit more to your thinking around this, and then we can always follow up later in via email if you have further questions. The big question, the big takeaway, because there's a lot of text on these two slides I'm about to share. The question is, who are you, right? So it's not just about, well, it includes several things. To begin with, and as you think about an instructional resource or any article that you're writing in the journal, what is your connection to the topic? We want authors to be explicit about this. So here I've said, why are you interested in writing about it? What is your teaching experience related to the topic? Consider including some description about a specific time that you taught around this topic, as well as details about whom you're teaching, where you teach, etc. Context is really important, and in part to flesh out the fullness of what you're trying to communicate, to contextualize it for your readers so they have a better understanding of what you're trying to communicate. And then leading to this next piece is what your connection is to it, the lens, the perspectives that you bring to it individually. And that's where we also want to see how your race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, culture, religion, experiences, abilities, and/or other identities influence how you experience the world, your teaching environment, and this topic that you're talking about. That's a really big question. What we're trying to emphasize with this question, and the next slide will include some more questions, are reflections that we would like to see artists doing in advance of the writing. We hope that these are questions you're internalizing for all the work that you do, but certainly as you're writing, we want you thinking about this so that you can infuse your text with an explicit reference to what you're bringing to this topic. That's what author positionality is really all about. So related questions to this might include, Asavri, if you'll go to the next slide.
Okay. Yeah.
And again, these are questions we want you considering. It's not questions that, these are not questions that we then look through your manuscript and say, have they answered this question directly? It's not about a direct answer to these questions, but again, these are things that we want you reflecting on as an author and infusing your text with at least some reference to this. So other questions to consider around author positionality. How do you negotiate and balance your identities in society, in the art education field, and in the context of your article? What do you believe about race, culture, gender, sexuality, and/or abilities in society and in education? And how do you attend to your own convictions and beliefs about these things in your teaching? And how do you negotiate and balance your own interests and teaching agendas that might be different from others, including the students that you teach? So to sort of go back to some of what I'm seeing come up in the chat, and as you heard in Asavri's example with Sue Ehrlich's piece, she explicitly says, you know, more beautifully put than I'm about to say it, but I am white, and here is how that influences how I'm interpreting this work and how I'm presenting it. She's not making a generalized statement about what it means to be white. She's saying, me personally, here's how I bring that identity to this work, and that's a part of what influences my perspectives. So the difference being with what Ami talked about in her slides about generalizing groups of people, we obviously don't want to see authors that are generalizing about whole groups of other people, but we do want to see authors identifying and explicitly connecting to and reflecting on their own identities and how that influences their work. So I hope that's helpful. This is an ongoing discussion, so keep the questions coming and we'll do our best to answer them. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it on to Kendall.
There's one thing I forgot to mention, Kendall. I'm so sorry.
Go ahead, you're fine.
We're hoping to have the guidelines in a more accessible format up on the Taylor and Francis website in some time. But if you're already in the process of writing, and if you don't want to wait until then, please feel free to email us. Our email is arteducationir. No, Ashley, can you say something?
It's artedjournalir@gmail.com. Our email address is on the first slide for our section of this presentation. And I know that Dennis said these slides and a recording of this presentation will be on the website, so you'll be able to access that later. But
right, and even if you go to the Taylor and Francis website, you should also be able to find our email over there.
Right.
And if you can't wait until then, email us and we'll make it available to you.
Great. Okay, we're good. Okay, all right. Thank you, Ashley. Thank you, Asavri. And yep. So I'm just going to walk us through. I hope I'm Kendall Crabb. I'm the assistant editor. At this point, I hope I've answered a lot of questions, but we're going to do some question and answer at the end as well. So hang tight or put those questions in the chat. At this point in the webcast, I hope we have convinced you to submit your writing. As we've mentioned, you may submit an original manuscript up to 3,500 words, and instructional resources are 2,500 words. Both of these types of resources or articles include references, so make sure you're aware of that. And I hope you're wondering, how do I submit? So basically, we ask you to go to our website, so Art Education Journal on the NAEA website. And then at the bottom, it says to submit an article to Art Education, instructions for authors. That link is where you want to click. So go ahead, Asavri, we'll go to the next slide. And then it'll take you to this page. This is the Taylor and Francis online submission page, and it gives you our detailed instructions for authors. We are very explicit about everything that we need and hope to see with your submission. So please read those in detail. But if you have questions, please email me at arteducationjournal@gmail.com. But essentially what you'll need is you'll need a cover letter, a title page, an abstract, keywords, and then 2 copies of your manuscript. So 1 blind copy without identifying information, so we can't see, your author or co-author's names or institutional affiliation or anything that gives away who you are. And then 1 copy with author details. And when you're ready, you're going to go down to the submitting your paper, and it says submission portal right there. So you're going to click on that. And then that's where you're going to create an account through Taylor and Francis. And then there's very clear instructions about how to process that. And then we go to the next page. Sorry, that's my son in the background. All right. And then we review all manuscripts on a rolling basis. Although, as Ami mentioned, we do have special calls. So please check our website and social media for these opportunities. Once we've received your materials and your manuscript has passed our first technical check, we send it to 2 members of our review board. Our editorial review board, we just expanded it. We are now at 47 members who have expertise in K-12 art education, higher education, museum education, and community-based art education. So a breadth of experience and expertise. And then we pair each manuscript with 2 reviewers that are, well versed in in that topic that you're writing on. So each review takes 4 weeks. On average, it takes 57 days to receive an initial decision on your manuscript. And once a manuscript has been accepted for publication, our senior editor, Ami, slates it for an upcoming issue. Authors see proofs and answer copy editing questions before the issue is online or printed. Just a few other facts: since January 2021, we've already received 160 manuscripts this year, which is far above where we were last year at the end of the year. So have quite an interest in our journal, and we currently have an acceptance rate of 62%. And each issue of Art Education is sent to, I believe, Dennis, you can correct me, but 1,800 NAEA members. So we think it's a great way to share your ideas and your research with the field of art education. So essentially, we encourage you to submit your ideas through our journal. And again, we are here to support you. It is a mentoring journal. So the review board, Ami, Asavri, and Ashley and myself, we are all here to support you. So no question is too big or too small. And I believe that is it. So Asavri, yep, there's the general email, and that goes to me so I can answer any questions. I help with the technical issues that people come up with, and any questions you have about your manuscript or writing for art education. All right, and now we'll go to the questions. So I think we can scroll back. It looks like Ashley, did you answered Aaron? Let me see where we're at. Laura, okay. Okay, go ahead, Dennis.
I think you've done a fabulous job of answering questions along the way. All of you, thank you.
Okay, great, thank you.
Any loose ends?
Yep. Oh, I think Ami just answered this. There's no compensation to write for the journal. And then we should submit at least 2 months before. So you'll submit your manuscript, and it takes just a day or two for us to process the technical check, and then we send it out for review, and the reviewers get 4 weeks to review it. And then it goes to Ami, and she'll make her decision. And so you should have an answer within 5 weeks or so. And
Kendall, do you want to just quickly explain how much time it takes from acceptance to publication?
Yeah,
Kendall,
so
before
to
you
cover
do that, I just want to jump in and say that for instructional resources, it's a little bit different timeline.
Right. That's true.
So you can email us with questions about that, but it depends a little bit. It's a little bit different of a process. So it's not quite as, yeah, Asavri, I don't know if you want to chime in on that, but it varies. The timeline varies for instructional resources.
It does, because the process of reviewing for the other regular manuscripts is different from the way instructional resources are reviewed. So that's what makes the timeline different for instructional resources, but please feel free to email us if you have any questions about that.
Absolutely. And Ami, for your question, so on our most recent data on this is that 91 days for average from acceptance to online publication. But to walk through the whole process, it can take many months, especially. So if we do two revisions, then it's at least 3 to 4 months. Yep, that would be the fastest that we would get something published. Other questions? Oh, sorry, I wasn't looking at the chat. Okay. What percentage of instructional resources are accepted? That's a great question, Michelle. I'd have to pull that information from editorial manager. So I can do that. And then if you email me, I could let you know. Okay. Great. Do the issue themes determine article topics accepted for inclusion? No, so we accept or we review original manuscripts just generally on a rolling basis, and then the special issues are targeted on specific topics.
There was a question that came up that it looks like it came in just to the panelists, not to the panelists and attendees, which is can a submission that's been published by the Art Education Journal later be submitted somewhere else? And the answer is no. Once you've been published in one place, you can't submit the same article somewhere else.
Good, correct. Do you accept or publish any papers from undergraduates? Yes, we accept papers from undergraduates and graduate students. Yep. Wonderful. Any other questions? Go ahead, Dennis.
About it. Sounds really good. I thought I'd finish with Dr. Vicki Van Hurley's comment to all of you. Great webinar. I wish all academic journals produced webinars for insight on their submission process. So congratulations on me, Ashley Savari, and Kendall did a fabulous job for us. And I know we have the question will come up again and again that this recording will be posted on our website under Need to Know Webcasts, under Learning, and also we'll have a PDF of their presentation. But most importantly, I want our members to know, and those future members out there, how accessible this panel is to helping you with your writing process. And I agree with Dr. Ben-Hurley that I wish I had that way back in the day. That would have helped me a lot. So with that, I think we're okay, right, Ami?
We look forward to seeing your manuscripts and reach out to us if you have any questions. We shared a lot of links, so I'll put everything on the slideshow. So Dennis, you can then post it.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, we obviously cannot get through everything that we want to tell you, but we hope that this was helpful enough for you to consider writing for the journal.
And with that, we'll say good evening to everyone and have a great, restful rest of the summer. And I know the school year is right around the corner for so many out there. But once again, on behalf of NAEA and the board and our members, thanks a lot. And thanks once again, panelists. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.